welcome to the second ever banned episode. The first one ever posted was last year when Arkham's Asteroid was banned. And now, many months later, we have a huge ban and restricted announcement from Wizards of the Coast, affecting many formats, affecting many cards in those formats. I think this is the biggest general ban in a decade, from what I've seen and what I've heard. And I think overall, at least for Modern, this was a good banning. I think all the bannings were good in all the formats, but specifically with Modern and how this channel is very Modern-centric, I think the bans overall were good, and I want to go through each card, obviously, and give you my thoughts on each card, and the pros and cons of the bans, if any, for each card, and hopefully give you a bit more insight. I'm sure you all have your own opinions, and I would love to hear them in the comment section down below, whether you agree or disagree with me. I would definitely love to hear from you and have further discussions on these bannings. I think overall Modern is in a better place now with this banning, essentially. And yeah, I'm very interested to see where the format is going to go. Definitely my favorite deck, Temur Delver, is definitely in a better position now than it was before the banning. So, and there's so many other decks that I want to play again now with the format essentially changed. Let's get to the first card here, Field of the Dead. So this land always bothered me, and so did the other land that got banned in this announcement, but we'll get there in a second. Field of the Dead just is... it's a cool card. It's definitely a cool card, but it's also very hard to interact with. And it's one of those cards is once it's on the battlefield, it's generating so much value for the controller of that land that you almost have no chance of beating it. That's essentially it, unless you destroy it, the minute it comes down, or you have a Blood Moon out, in which case you're winning that game anyway, most likely. There's just no real way to recover when Field of the Dead has other cards that are working around it, like Primeval Titan, like Uro, like Renin 6, and Omnath, Locus of Creation, just kind of doubles down on all of that as well. All four of these cards had Field of the Dead, playing alongside them for obvious reasons, and they abused Field of the Dead, plain and simple. There's no way to power down Field of the Dead. And when I was arguing on Reddit and Twitter about how Uro is okay, it's very powerful, but it's an okay card in Modern, I was really pointing to Field of the Dead and Mystic Sanctuary as the true problems. Get rid of those cards and you severely power down Uro decks, Primeval Titan decks, and the format can adjust a bit better. Well, Wizards definitely did target Field of the Dead, and I think this was a proper banning. I think the value generated from it was too great. There was no real way to come back from it, and it just became, oppressive. And if they didn't ban it, the strategy would have still existed, and the decks would have still been problematic. At the end of the day, I think this was a good call. Mystic Sanctuary, very similar, although it saw play in several other types of decks as well, and not just Primeval Titan decks, specifically not Primeval Titan decks. But in Control Shells and other Uro Piles decks, Mystic Sanctuary was also abused, and I was peer pressured into playing Mystic Sanctuary, even though it's specifically the type of land I don't like playing, where it has a hard condition on whether it comes to battlefield tapped or not, and I don't really have a say in it, and it's really bad early on. I don't want to get into that, but I was peer pressured into it, obviously jokingly, because it's just so good that it doesn't make sense not to play it in so many decks. There are so many spells you can recur, put onto the top of your library and draw again and cast again, that it just didn't make sense not to play it. It generated so much value, and especially when you have cards like Renin 6, where you can go get fetches out of your graveyard, play them, go get other Mystic Sanctuaries, and essentially put your opponents in soft locks. There are decks that could essentially keep Cryptic Command on the top of their library and in their hand every turn, using Mystic Sanctuary and using flicker effects to, let's say, bounce Mystic Sanctuary into exile and back onto the battlefield, recurring its effect and putting Cryptic Command, or essentially anything, even Time Warp, on top of the library and then drawing it, and then your opponent always has Cryptic Command, so they could always tap you out and draw a card, tap you out, draw a card, until they get into their win condition, and then it's game over. So Mystic Sanctuary just caused a lot of, unfair interactions, unfair locks, And again, it's a very cool card. It's a common card. It's a very cool common card. It's just not fair. It's not fair, and although I don't think just being unfair should be a reason to ban a card, you know, Mystic Sanctuary was not just that. It saw top tier play. It was very obviously making decks more powerful than they would be if it wasn't being played. And again, I think this was a correct ban to see in Modern. So Simian Spirit Guide is an interesting ban. Personally, I think Simian Spirit Guide should have been banned a long time ago. When you look at cards like this and Tibalt Trickery, which we're going to get to, this card was designed to do one thing and one thing only. Whether the original designers saw it or not, this is what they were doing. They were building this card to do degenerate things. When I say degenerate, I mean you're essentially doing things that the game wasn't meant to deal with in an appropriate way. And what does that mean? So I'll just give you some examples of how I've seen Simian Spirit Guide abused in the past 7 years of me playing Modern. Okay, these are just some of the examples I could come up with, and some of them were definitely more problematic than others. Now, I'm not saying that any of these cards should be banned in particular. You know, Ad Nauseam, I think, was basically a borderline fair combo deck. It was a deck that, you know, sometimes went off early, but oftentimes you need to get to turn 4 to combo off. So it gave opponents time to kind of build up and be prepared for that inevitability to try and stop the combo from going off and then the Ad Nauseam player losing. I think it was very much borderline. You know, up to turn 4, it was more or less fair. They kind of did their own thing. They weren't necessarily stopping you from doing anything of your own. So Ad Nauseam, I think, was borderline. But everything else, whether it was Goblin Charbelcher, which saw a lot more play last year, doing Chalice of the Void turn 1, which is just completely oppressive and not what Chalice of the Void was meant to do, which is why it was XX. You know, obviously the original designers expected you to do it turn 2 and on. You know, Blood Moon, although I think Blood Moon is a fair and necessary card in Modern, getting it out on turn 1, even turn 2, is a problem, and Simian Spirit Guide definitely enabled those kind of plays. And although Simian Spirit Guide didn't necessarily push many decks, although some decks did go into tier 1 or even tier 0 status, it saw playing a lot of lower decks. It did cause a lot of unfair games, or a lot of non-games, essentially. And of course, even Tibalt's Trickery went to Simian Spirit Guide initially, you know, to be abused. And of course, Tibalt Trickery just took a life on its own after that, and you know, we'll get to that in a second. Now, what's interesting about the Simian Spirit Guide ban, is that Wizards of the Coast has now revealed that they've slightly changed their banning criteria. For a while, they banned to shakeup formats, and then they kind of changed to a stats-based banning, where if a deck just became too consistent in its win rates or became too oppressive in a format in terms of percentage of play, then it would get banned. Now they're saying they're also taking in community feedback, and it's a bit more open-ended on what can be banned. So something being unfun and unfair, even if it's not necessarily pushing into high tier status, can be banned in the future, and I think that's interesting. I don't agree with it, even though I hate, you know, most of the cards on this on this screen that you're looking at right now, except for Blood Moon, even if it's being played against me. You know, I hate Chalice of the Void. I don't think it should be legal, you know, deep down inside. I even hate Ensnaring Bridge. You don't see it here, but look it up. Look and see what Ensnaring Bridge does. I assure you, it doesn't do. You know, the decks that play it are not playing fair. You know, Goblin Charbelcher is a ridiculous card that's only built to be abused. I don't like any of these cards, but truly, at the end of the day, if you told me should we ban them right now, no, because I don't think they're oppressive enough that they're pushing into higher tiers. If they ever did, then by all means ban them immediately, and I'll be super happy that it does. But I prefer taking the more numbers-based approach. It seems Wizards of the Coast disagrees, and at the end of the day, it's their game, so they're going to do it the way they want to do it. So let's just keep that in mind in the future. Simian Spirit Guide is more of a canary in a coal mine for me in terms of, you know, where Wizards of the Coast is looking in terms of bannings in the future. So let's just keep that in mind. I think overall, though, this card was built to be abused. It was only ever abused in Modern. It was never played in fair decks, ever, any deck ever playing Simian Spirit Guide was doing something stupid and unfair and essentially felt like cheating. So at the end of the day, I'm happy to see it go, and now we understand the adjusted criteria for banning as well. So Tibalt's Trickery. Yeah, another card that was literally built to be degenerate. It was built to do things that are not what you would traditionally see in a Magic game. Not only that, when you look at Tibalt's Trickery, and everyone said it when it was spoiled, it's only going to be abused. It was never going to be used as a counterspell in red decks to give red decks a counterspell. It was ridiculous. I saw a lot of people making that claim, oh, Burn now gets a counterspell. No, Burn doesn't want to do counterspells. Burn just wants to burn you as quickly as possible and kill you in the first 2 to 3 turns, or 3 to 4 turns at the most. So they were never going to play Tibalt's Trickery because they're not playing that kind of game. So Tibalt's Trickery was never going to be Burn's counterspell. It was only ever going to be used to abuse some sort of mechanic or some sort of interaction in some format, and it did in many formats, in particular in Modern. So I'm happy to see it go, very happy to see it go so quickly. I was concerned that it was going to stick around because it's literally just been printed, it literally just went live, in terms of printing a few weeks ago, so I was concerned that Wizards was going to kind of let it simmer a bit. But I think it's a good call. If they're going to do one big ban announcement, might as well get Tibalt's Trickery out now, because it was only going to get worse as the weeks went on, and this was just true, factually. The numbers were getting worse and worse as the collective mind, hive mind of Modern players, refined the Tibalt Trickery decks more and more, using Violent Outburst and Ardent Plead to get into Ulamog and Emrakul, and then we even saw people shifting away from this altogether and just building a whole bunch of other value oops all spells decks, not even bothering of Emrakul or some other big Eldrazi, and it just got really bad, which is why they also fixed Cascade. We'll get to that at the end of this video. So Tibalt's Trickery, I'm happy it's gone. Bad call on designing it, good call on banning it. Last but not least, Uro, Titan's Nature's Wrath. All right, so of all the cards that were banned in this announcement, I understand why Uro was banned. I understand why so many players hated it. I know that there were a lot of players that also enjoyed it, that didn't play with it, but they still thought it was fine in Modern. I was one of the players that had very strong opinions on why Uro should remain in Modern and why other cards around it should be banned, and I think Uro would have been brought into line. But realistically speaking, I never conceded the fact that I always concede the fact that Uro is a huge power-up to Magic in general. That's how powerful Uro is and the way it was costed. 3 mana, 1 blue, 1 green, 1 colorless, which means it's splashable. What it did and what it allowed you to do once it came back onto the battlefield was very, very powerful. Now, my argument is that the power level was exaggerated by a lot of players because it felt bad and it felt helpless sometimes once Uro did enter the battlefield. But realistically speaking, and this still holds true right now, there are a lot of decks that by turn 3 or 4, if you don't have a good grasp on the game, they're going to beat you. Like, it's over, whether you see it or not. Uro was essentially the same thing. If it got onto the battlefield by turn 3 or 4, sometimes 5, it was never guaranteed. If everything went perfectly, it would come onto the battlefield turn 4, which is not often the case in Magic games. So, but once it did, it beat you. Fine. So do a lot of other decks right now. This was often my argument, but at the end of the day, people just didn't like how it played. They didn't like the feeling of it being played against them. It's kind of like the idea of, if I counter your spell, you're pissed off, but if I let your spell resolve and then I lightning bolt your creature instead, you're almost okay with it. I think it was that kind of effect on people. They just didn't like what Uro was doing, even though plenty of other decks or other interactions do the exact same thing. But yes, it did cause a lot of Uro decks to bubble up, which was also a problem in terms of, I guess, the variety of decks you would see in the higher tiers. But even there, if we look at the hard numbers, and I guarantee you, if Wizards purely looked at the hard numbers, they would not have banned Uro. because, you know, percentages did go up a bit. It peaked around 15% of the meta, and then those decks started to die down in the last 2-3 weeks. But, you know, it was banned anyway. For me, when they were dying down, it showed that the format was adjusting. But again, this could be a really long argument. I don't want to speak about Uro forever. It's banned. It's fine. I won't argue for it becoming unbanned in the future. It is what it is. We've drawn a line in the sand and said Uro is too much. I think in 2-3 years, as power creep continues, we'll probably have to revisit this line, almost certainly. Another card will be printed, and we'll have to revisit the line again. I think Uro is going to be the new measuring stick, essentially, for if a card is too powerful, because that's essentially why it was banned. So Uro, Titan Nature's Wrath, is gone. So last but not least, there was a Cascade rule change. I'm happy to see it. Basically what people were doing was they were playing Cascade spells that had nothing to do with the deck, Violent Outburst being one example, and they would cascade into Valki, God of Lies. Now, Valki, God of Lies, the creature, kind of sucks. I mean, generally speaking, in Modern, it's not really what you want to be doing. What you want to be doing is Tibalt Cosmic Imposter, and you want to be doing that as early as possible. Now, the trick here was that Cascade allowed you to cast either side when you cascaded into Valki, God of Lies. Now, what they've essentially done is fix that. So if you Violent Outburst cascade into Valki, God of Lies, you have to still check the casting cost of either side to be able to cast that side. So in this case, if you Violent Outburst into Valki, God of Lies, okay, Valki, God of Lies is 2 mana, it's less than 3, you can cast it. Tibalt Cosmic Imposter is 7 mana, it's not less than 3, last I checked. So you can't cast it. And I think it's a very elegant fix. I'm happy they didn't break anything else with Cascade. They didn't kill Cascade, which I think is also correct. So, it's fine. I'm happy they did the fix. These decks are also going to die very quickly. So now the format sits at a very reset. I mean, it's a great reset. I mean, governments have been saying that about the thing that's going on right now. I can't say it for whatever weird reasons on YouTube. This was kind of like a great reset for the format, and other formats got kind of like a great reset as well. But for Modern in particular, we've kind of gone back a bit. We've gone back essentially a year and a half in terms of general power level, what kind of decks are going to be the main decks, and it's really too early to tell. It's going to take a couple of weeks for everything to settle down, but I suspect that Tron decks are going to make a comeback. Mid-range is definitely back. My favorite tempo decks, Temur and Delver in particular, is definitely going to make a comeback. I hope it makes a good, strong comeback. I'm definitely going to try and make that a strong comeback alongside the other huge and awesome Temur Delver community. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting format. I'm generally excited, even though Uro is gone. I did enjoy playing with Uro, but it's gone. That's fine. Most of my decks seemingly didn't rely on Uro that much, so I'm kind of happy about that. I guess I never leaned too hard on Uro to build decks, which was, I guess, a good call at the end of the day. So yeah, let me know what you think about these bannings. I'm really curious to hear about your opinions on the different cards that were banned, and what your thoughts are on my thoughts. So let me know in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, double thumbs it down. Just let me know how badly you hated it. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe. If you don't like my content, subscribe as well. I would appreciate the support either way. If you're interested in becoming a patron, check out the Patreon link in the description of this video. Join my ever-growing Patreon community. That would be really cool. I would appreciate your support. Plus, check out the tiers, because I essentially give you back part of your money at the end of every year. So I'm trying to help you help me. Let's put it that way. Thanks, and have a good one.